Well, hello there. Just very quick warning, this episode does contain a pretty bloody brutal description of death. So that is your warning. Are you a witch or are you a fairy? Or are you the wife of Michael Cleary? If you were passing through Ireland right now and you saw some children playing with ropes, playing that jumping game, they might well be singing that rhyme. It started with one. It quickly became two, and then more, and then more, and it was hundreds, and it was thousands. The power of people is amazing, isn't it? But what happens when a group gets carried away and deadly decisions are made? It's a peculiar thing when a group decides to act, because who really makes the decision? One person? Someone else? Or is it the whole group? 9 people watched as she died, no one stopping the madness. She isn't the same person and we have to act. Something must be done. I've always known she was unusual. I just didn't believe she was In a moment of madness, strange decisions are made. And what if they're not made alone? Welcome to Extraordinary Stories podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. I am. Thank you for those who have been messaging and asking. I am well, and I am here with stories to tell. So here we go with a new set of stories. This is the first one in a series, and I'll tell you what I am absolutely fascinated with at the moment. I'm absolutely fascinated by stories involving groups of people, crowds of people, and how the kind of madness that comes from group mentality, from crowds of people all getting together, and how wrong those things can go. Now, this story is quite a well-known one, so you may have heard it before, but I think it's so fascinating. It is a wild ride of a story. So, I suppose the question is this. Are you ready? Okay. My darlings, let's go. Okay, 1895, in a place called Tipperary. Now, there's a song which people, I don't know if it's maybe known outside of the UK, I'm not sure. People in the UK sing this song about Tipperary and how it's a very far away place. It's a very popular song. Now, I won't sing it for you because you know I am very shy when it comes to my singing voice. Anyway, here we are, 1895 in Tipperary, which is in Ireland. Now it's right at the sort of southern tip of Ireland, which I guess is why the song talks about it being far away. So if you'd been there in that particular year, at that particular time, just happened to be walking down the street, you might have seen the following. A one Bridget Cleary. Now, Bridget would have just been walking down the street, loving her life. And you would have spotted Bridget. Let me tell you, you would have spotted her because she was different from a lot of the women of that time. And here's how. Bridget liked to dress in bright colours, modern fabrics, and she was often seen wearing a very busy hat. And you know, she was. I suppose we would maybe today say she was an eccentric dresser. At the time, she was certainly looked upon as eccentric in her dress. Now, that wasn't all that made Bridget different or stand out. She was a modern woman. She was a forward thinker, and she didn't really fall into like a lot of those kind of society norms of the time. Right, for example, she was 26. She was married, but she didn't have any children. And Bridget didn't believe that you had to have children just because you were female. She didn't believe you had to have a particular type of job just because society said so. So she worked 2 different jobs. She was a dressmaker and a seamstress, hence her sometimes eye-catching outfits. And for her other job, she sold eggs. Great. Sell those eggs. Make that money, Bridget. Brilliant. Now, she was married to a man called Michael Cleary, and he was a cooper. Now, I'd never heard of this, so I did have to look it up. But a cooper was someone who would work with wood, and they would make specific tools from wood. So it was a decent paying job. Bridget also earned quite a nice living between her dressmaking and selling of the eggs. Now, Bridget and Michael, they were just working away, keeping themselves to themselves. That was something that people in Tipperary couldn't do. They couldn't keep themselves to themselves because people always wanted to be talking about Michael and Bridget. Now, the weird thing is this, they'd never actually done anything. It was just that people talked about them with raised eyebrows. And when I say talked about them, I really mean Bridget. People in the local town would describe her as brazen. I just think brazen is the weirdest word. It kind of doesn't really mean anything. I don't know what it's meant to mean. Anyway, she was described as brazen and peculiar. And this is where my interest in this story starts. As you'll hear when I go on to tell it, Bridget's story is unbelievably brutal. It is absolutely horrible what happens to her. But it's set against this backdrop of other people's gossip, other people's ideas. You know, the crowd in this really play a major role as the supporting cast in Bridget's downfall. There used to be groups of churchgoers in Tipperary who would pray for Bridget. I mean, hashtag pray for Bridget. Now, there wasn't really any reason to pray for Bridget other than she just kind of didn't really want to be a part of the local church-going crowd. She didn't attend the local meetings, not for any particularly bad reason, I might add, It just wasn't her scene. It wasn't her thing. But because I suppose people at that time expected that that's what a young 26-year-old woman would want to do, Bridget was like, well, it's not really my thing to go to church and to meet with these particular women in town, so I'll just do my own thing. That's why they prayed for her. So she's like, let's just be clear, she's like 26, walking down the street, loving her life, selling her eggs from her basket, being like, all the women who independent, throw your hands up at me. And it's everyone else who's got the problem with her. Well, obviously Bridget was not singing that song because it was the year 1895 and Beyonce hadn't been invented yet. But you get my drift. So, let's add this little layer to the story. In order to get her eggs to sell, Bridget would have to meet a young man by the name of William Simpson, who was the egg merchant. I'm not sure if that's what you would call him, but I've decided that's what his job was. Let's just call him William the Egg Merchant. Now, they would meet on a particular road at a particular time in the week, and the egg merchant would hand the eggs over to Bridget. Well, the townspeople decided to put 2 and 2 together and got 74 because they decided that Bridget and the egg merchant must be having an affair. Bollocks. Utter bollocks. There was never any proof that there was anything going on between these two except within the gossip circles in Tipperary. Now another and, well, possibly, even larger reason for their scrutiny of Bridget was that she had an interest in fairies. Bridget believed heavily in their existence, and she was often seen by nosy locals walking into the fairy gardens around Tipperary on her own. Just of an afternoon, Bridget might just take herself off to one of these fairy gardens, have a little walk around, and this was big news in the town. Now, just to give that a little bit more context, because this is hugely important to Bridget's story. Fairies at this time in Ireland were not the fairies that we think of now. Like people wear jumpers now that say things like, sprinkle me with fairy dust and all that jazz. No, not that, right? We're not talking about that kind of fairy. We're talking about evil, malevolent? What's the word? Benevolent? Presence, whatever I'm trying to say. Whatever those things are, like evil kind of forces. Fairies back then in Ireland were a very scary thing, a very menacing and supernatural force not to be messed with. Belief in these fairies would strike absolute fear and worry into most people. Fairies got blamed for all sorts. Things like if the milk went sour, if the chicken stopped laying eggs, if the storm didn't stop after 2 days, if the rivers were overflowing, if the house was cold, all of these things. People believed this is because the fairies were unhappy and they were punishing human beings. Now I'm just going to stop here and I'm going to say, when I was looking at this story, I did have my reservations. I had my reservations about this whole fairy business. I was like, fairies, I don't know. It's a bit rubbish. It's a bit light. Do you know, I just felt it was a bit like, and I'm not sure if maybe you're thinking along the same lines, but if you are, I urge you to stay with me, because the story's not really about fairies, it's more about what the belief in something like that can do to seemingly normal people. So, there is a fairy fort near where Bridget and Michael live, and the locals are absolutely terrified to go anywhere near it, because it's believed that if you go into the fairy fort, you may disturb the fairies and the punishment will be big. But it doesn't frighten Bridget. She'll happily take a walk through it any time of the day. So let's go to Monday, March the 4th, 1895. It's the start of the working week, and here's Bridget off for a day of egg selling. So she gets ready for work, Michael gets ready for work, and off they go. I do hope someone said to Bridget just before she left for work, Bridget, you better get a second basket because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Is that the worst joke I've ever told on the podcast? Possibly, but I tell you what, it made me laugh. So this day, this Monday, March the 4th, she's delivering eggs to her father's cousin, and he lives right next to the fairy fort that I mentioned. It's on her way, so she decides to stop off, take a little wander through the fort. Now, although it's March, it's a freeze your nuts off kind of day, and it's sort of snowing and raining, and it's a horrible, miserable winter's day. And Bridget ends up getting absolutely soaked from the rain. And she's extremely, extremely wet when she returns home. Like, her boots are soaked through with rain and snow. It's just horrible. So when she gets home, she finds that her body just won't heat up. So she ends up going to bed in the early afternoon, because as well as being absolutely freezing, she's now got this banging sore head and she's shivering from the cold. She just feels awful. Now, it's absolutely perfectly possible she's just picked up a chill. In fact, that is entirely likely what has happened. When Michael returns home from work, he asks her, what's wrong? Why are you in bed? And she tells him that she'd gotten wet and she doesn't feel well. And he says, well, what did you do today? And she says, well, I went to sell the eggs, etc. I took a little walk through the fairy fort, even though it was raining. That was pretty much it. Michael about loses his shit. Now, he loves Bridget's cookie ways, but he's like, come on, Bridget, it was pissing down with rain, and you went to visit the fairy fort rather than come straight home and get dry. What were you thinking? Have you lost your mind? Now, Bridget's used to people thinking that she's odd, thinking that she does bizarre things, but normally Michael is quite supportive, however, not on this day. You see, Michael's got a worry here. He's got a concern. He's wondering if the illness that's made his wife take to bed is slightly more than just a chill, more than just getting wet. He's wondering if there could be something supernatural at play here. He's wondering if it could be the work of the fairies. It's not long before the whispering around town begins. Bridget Cleary has acted very irresponsibly. She's gotten ill as a result. That's what comes of messing in the fairy fort, is what people say. And of course, all those people who think that she's careless and she's reckless and, she's a law unto herself, that one, they're just loving this because they're like, we always told you. Now that gossip quickly changes to something way more sinister, because people actually start to really believe that something supernatural has gone on here and that Bridget is not herself. Now, Michael lets a couple of days pass with Bridget still in bed, and she's showing absolutely no signs of improvement. So, he calls the local doctor, and the local doctor attends and says, Bridget is suffering from nervous excitement and slight bronchitis. I love these old-timey diagnosis. Nervous excitement, I say. Now, this is just my opinion, but I think this diagnosis, it might be the only sensible bit of behaviour in this story. The rest is bonkers from here on out, but I think that this doctor has got it right. The doctor says what she needs is bed rest, and he gives Michael a medicine for her slight bronchitis, and off the doctor goes. Bridget is completely satisfied with this. Now, she's been in bed for almost a week and there isn't any improvement, so she's just glad that a doctor who actually knows what he's talking about has come to the house, said this is what it is, and that she's got some medication. But let's look at what her husband is thinking here, because he's about to become the key player in all of this. Michael has got doubts about the doctor's diagnosis. He thinks it's just not that simple to explain her illness. There's got to be more going on here. And here's what he does. He goes to a friend of his by the name of Jack Dunn. Now, Jack Dunn has a very interesting job. He is a storyteller stroke myth expert, otherwise known at the time in Ireland as a Shawnee. Someone who's well versed in the legends of the land and who knows all about the fairies and the goblins and the witches and the wizards and, you know, the dangers of messing with all of that. So Michael tells this Jack Dunn, the storyteller, that his wife just isn't the same person in her sickbed. He's saying to him, I just don't think that is my wife in that bed. I think something is different. And when the storyteller, Jack Dunn, says to him, what is it that you think is different? He says, well, for a start, she's 2 inches taller and she's better looking than my wife Bridget. Now, how the hell is he getting that? How the hell is he coming to that conclusion? I've got no idea. So, Bridget's lying in bed. She's been in bed for a week with bronchitis. And he's saying that she's grown by 2 inches and that she's better looking. Now, I'm no doctor, right? I am no doctor. But do people grow and get better looking when they have bronchitis? No. I've never heard of that. I might just not be, down with my medical knowledge, but I'm not sure. But Jack Dunn, the Shawnee storyteller, he says these are very alarming signs. Something is wrong. And I'll tell you who you need to visit. You need to go and see the fairy doctor. For fuck's sake. I swear in old-timey 1800s, they just made jobs up. They just made jobs up. What the hell is a fairy doctor? I mean, I'd love to be one, but I have absolutely no idea how I'd train to do that. I mean, I'm not sure that the Open University do courses in fairy doctoring, but I'll check. So off Michael goes to the fairy doctor, Dr. Gainey. He explains his woes and the fairy doctor listens, He tells Michael his suspicions are right, and that Bridget has in fact been taken by the fairies and replaced with a changeling. Meaning that the woman in the bed is not his wife, but another woman who's been put there by the fairies. And Bridget is lost in some kind of limbo. She's not dead, she's not alive, and that she will come back, but it's going to take some pretty radical treatment. Michael believes every word of this. It all makes perfect sense to him. Of course it's not Bridget in that bed. As we've discussed, she's taller, she's better looking. What more proof could you possibly need? But what to do about it? Well, bring the fairy doctor to the house, of course. So the fairy doctor concocts this mixture that's made up of fresh milk taken directly from a cow. He mixes some herbs into it and he forces Bridget to drink it. Now, Bridget, as we know, is no wallflower, right? She's not someone to just do what she's told. So she protests. She tells Michael, there's no need for all this madness. I've got bronchitis. I don't need the mixture. But Michael is, by this point, fully believing that this is a demon in the bed. So he forces it down his wife's throat and she ends up spitting it up all over the bed. This carries on for hours as he tries to force her to drink the mixture. Now, in the room watching this at the time are, well, of course, there's Michael in the room. There's the fairy doctor. There's Jack Dunn, the storyteller that he went to see. And then there's another just random local man who's heard that there's something going on in the Cleary house and wants to basically be there so that he can tell the whole rest of the town what's happening. So yeah, by all means, come on in, random fucking stranger. In you come, you nosy bastard. Outside of the house, the town is like completely alight with gossip. I mean, have you heard? Bridget Cleary, she's been taken, she's been replaced by a changeling. The woman in the bed, that's not his wife. All of that is going on. Now, Michael, at this point, he's on that tipping point where he kind of believes that, yeah, the fairies have somehow turned his wife into something that's not quite his wife, but he's watching Bridget and he's looking at her screaming from the bed that she is who she says she is. And there's a point here where I think Michael could have actually believed her. But it's the whispering of people in his ear telling him, that's not your wife. That is not Bridget. You know, everybody else seems so convinced of it that he just eventually goes 100%, yeah, okay, that's not my wife. So the men continue to try and make Bridget drink this mixture of milk and herbs. And when she just won't drink it, when she absolutely will not take that drink, do you know what they do? The four of them, the four men, they throw urine on her as a punishment. What? I'm sorry. How did that happen? Whose idea, for a start, was that? And what did they do? Did they all just stop and pee in a glass? Like, oh, just the whole thing's horrible. It's just bizarre. The fairy doctor tells Michael that fairies hate heat. This is what they hate. So, his advice is that Michael should hold a red-hot poker close to her face and force her to admit that she is a changeling. So Michael does this. Gets the poker, he holds it to her face, and he tells her, admit that you are not my wife. And you will be fine. If you can admit that you are not who you say you are, you will come back to me. And she won't, because Bridget's like, this is mental. This whole thing is mental. Michael is raging, livid at this, and the fairy doctor says she needs to tell you 3 times in the name of God that she is your wife, because with fairies things work in threes. So if she can tell you 3 times that she is your wife, then there is a chance that we can get her back. But if she can't say it, if she can only say it a couple of times, she has been taken, and we have to take more drastic action. So he holds the poker up to her face again, and she tells him twice that she is Bridget Cleary, his wife, in the name of God. But as she tries to say the third one, her voice stops in her throat and she can't say it. And for the fairy doctor and for Michael and the other men in the room, this confirms it. She is a changeling. By the following day, the entire town is gathering in groups to discuss what should happen to Bridget and how they were right all along that she wasn't normal. Michael goes out for a walk at one point, leaving his sick wife in the hands of some family members, and every single person that he meets tells him, "I'm so sorry to hear that your wife has been taken." And Michael tries to tell them, look, she's not gone forever. All I have to do is get rid of the evil fairy and she will return to me, my beautiful Bridget, my wife. And people in the town are looking at him, shaking their head, thinking, no, she's gone. But Michael's convinced that she can come back. I mean, must be hellish for Bridget, where she's in that bed and nobody believes that she is who she is. I mean, okay, I'm not saying that I've had the exact same experience, because I wasn't accused of being a fairy in 1895. But I'll tell you this, I went to New York recently, and at the passport control, I go to passport control, and the man would not believe that I was who I was on my passport. I mean, and it threw me into such a panic. He asked me my name, and I like almost forgot my name for a minute. Then he asked me, why was I here, business or pleasure? And I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember why I was there. I got like really, really panicked. Then, to make it all worse, he asked me what date I was leaving on, and I didn't know what date I was leaving on. It was so. I mean, I get where Bridget's coming from. I get where she's coming from. Obviously, I'm kidding. It was much worse for her. So on his return from his walk round the village, Michael decides to try another suggestion from the fairy doctor. In an even more bonkers turn, it's believed that making someone who might have been taken over by the fairies eat 3 pieces of bread with jam on it, followed by a glass of fresh milk, is a way to prove once more that the fairies have taken them over. It's believed that changelings can't stand fresh milk, and that they wouldn't be able to eat 3 things in a row. So this is the proof Michael's looking for. So he gets the fresh milk, he gets the 3 slices of bread, puts the jam on it, and he forces her to eat this. Bridget is so ill by this point. I mean, she can barely stay awake, but he forces her to eat the first slice of bread, and she takes it. Then she takes the second piece of bread. But when it gets to the third piece of bread, she can't take it. She physically cannot put it in her mouth. Now, by this point, there are 9 people in the room. There's the 4 men that I mentioned earlier, and there's 5 members of the extended family, cousins and aunts, who've all been there to see Bridget. So 9 people are crowded round her bed, watching her unable to eat this third slice of bread. Then Michael hands her the milk. She can't drink the milk. Michael is screaming at her This will prove what I'm trying to say. Just drink the milk. And she can't. At this, Michael said, I am not going to keep an old witch in place of my wife. I must get my wife back. He drags her out of the bed at this point, and for the last time forces her to admit that she is not Bridget Cleary. And she couldn't. She continues to protest that she is who she says she is. At this, Michael gets hold of a red hot poker from the fire. He rips open her nightdress until she's naked, and he pours lamp oil over her body, and he tries to set her on fire. Now, in that room, not one of those 9 people tried to stop him. Instead, they watched. When she didn't burn the way that Michael wanted her to, he dragged her to the fire in the living room, and he gave her one last chance to admit she was a fairy. She said nothing. And at this, Michael poured kerosene on her body and he lit her on fire. Bridget burned to death with 10 people watching her. And Michael said in a quiet voice, "It is not my wife I am burning, but an old witch. My Bridget will return to me tomorrow." When the family extinguished the body of Bridget and there were no more flames, Michael wrapped her in a blanket, took the body outside, and he carried her to a field where he threw her under a bush, hidden from view. He then went to the fairy fort, the place this all started, and he waited. Michael had been told by the fairy doctor that now that the old witch was dead, he should expect Bridget to return on a white horse, wrapped in ropes. He would need to cut the ropes, and that would be that. His wife would be returned, he could take her home, no harm done. Lovely. Michael Cleary waited for 3 full days in the fairy fort. His wife did not return on a white horse. Those gossip mongers, those ones who loved to talk about what a wench she was, now suddenly changed their tune. Poor Bridget, they said. Oh dear, to be killed by your husband in such a horrendous manner, with other people watching and nobody stopped him. That's what they said. So Michael went in to hiding. One of the people who had watched eventually couldn't take it anymore and went to police to say exactly what had happened, and so a manhunt was underway to try and find her body, and it didn't take long. When she was discovered under that bush, Bridget's burns were so severe that her skeleton was visible. Michael and the 9 others were arrested on murder charges. Now, I think this is interesting. The judge in this trial, which, by the way, was major news across Europe, the judge discusses the fact that this wasn't the act of one person. This was an act carried out by many. He says, the death of Bridget Cleary shows a degree of darkness in the mind not just of one person, but of several. A moral darkness, even religious darkness, has spread through this group. The 9 people who watched her burn to death, they were all punished and they were given varying times of jail sentences. To be honest, none of them, when they got out of jail, ever returned to normal life. Normal life in Tipperary was just not the thing for them. Their names were absolutely sullied by the absolute brutality of the crime. But Michael, well, he's the main man in court. His initial charge of murder, that gets downgraded to manslaughter. His lawyer argues that Michael was put up to it by the fairy doctor and the town gossip, and that he didn't act alone, and that actually he hadn't meant to kill his wife, he simply took it too far. The judge agrees with this. Michael is, of course, found guilty of manslaughter and is given 5 years in prison. The judge is quite lenient in this case, and he seems to really, really believe that Michael wouldn't have acted this way if it wasn't for people whispering in his ear. This is what I'm talking about, this is what I'm saying, and what fascinates me, when other people get involved and then it goes wrong. After 5 years, Michael is a free man. And the day he leaves Tipperary prison, he boards a ship to Canada and he disappears into thin air. And I really mean that. Absolutely into thin air. Whether he changes his name or changes his look or whatever Michael Cleary does, he is never seen or heard from ever again. Who he becomes in Canada and how he lives his life is a complete mystery. No one has any clue whether or not he remarries, has children, has grandchildren. There might be an entire family out there in Canada. Hello, Canadian listeners. You might be part of Michael Cleary's family, but hey, we will never know, because honestly the man just disappears into nothing. Bridget is given a proper burial in Tipperary and the townsfolk eventually settled down. But what's left behind is just the most incredible story of beliefs gone wrong, listening to the wrong people, and a very clear warning that listening to other people's advice isn't always wise. So if you're ever in Ireland and you walk past some kids playing with ropes and singing this rhyme, you will know why. Are you a witch, or are you a fairy, or are you the wife of Michael Cleary? And so ends the story. Alright then, fabulous. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed the first instalment in my story of crowds. More to come very soon. If you've got any stories along this kind of vein, do get in touch. Let me know. I like to hear from you. And as I said at the beginning, thank you very, very much those who have been in touch recently. It's very kind of you. But yeah, I'm back. I'm all good. Everything is good. Thank you, a big thank you to Lorraine and to Zane, who've done a fabulous job keeping up the Facebook group while I've been away doing other stuff. So yes, great. I think that's really all from me. And until the next episode, be well, be safe. Okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.